The Communion Girl is the newest Shudder original horror film to appear on the Shudder streaming service. But is the film any good and should you be checking it out? Well, stick around and let's talk about it. While returning from a nightclub and after having taken drugs, new girl in town Sara and her friend Rebe find a doll wearing a communion dress. From that moment, their lives will become a living hell. The film stars Carla Campra, Aina Quinones, Marc Soler, Carlos Oviedo, Olimpia Roch, Maria Molins, and many others, and was directed by Victor Garcia, and he's done films like Hellraiser, Revelations, An Affair to Die For, and The Damned. So going into The Communion Girl, I absolutely knew nothing about this film. I didn't watch a trailer, and actually Shudder didn't even send me a screener for this, which was kind of interesting. So I went ahead and just checked it out on the Shudder streaming service. It did premiere this last Friday, and the film, it starts out with this woman seeing this supposed entity, and eventually she ends up killing herself from this entity that keeps haunting her. We then cut to two girls. We cut to Rebe and also Sara, their friends, and they're going to church, and then eventually they end up going to a nightclub. And before they go to this nightclub, we learn about Sara's parents and how they work late nights, and she also has a sister named Judith as well. So when she goes to this nightclub, they're about to leave, their friend actually bails on them, and so they have to actually hitchhike or find another ride home. And in doing so, they do find a guy that is going to take them home, and he's actually a drug dealer. After he picks them up, they end up in the woods, and when they get into the woods here, they have a lot of strange occurrences that actually happen in these woods. There's a dog that's actually hanging from a tree, and you get those creepy kind of aspects. And then from that point on, it then cuts to morning, and we see that Sara has brought home a doll, and from that point, there is a point where she's being cursed. She's being stalked by this woman in a bride dress, and this is where the film, it starts to actually go into its horror tropes. So you have like a mark on the girl's arm. There is moments where they use like a bathroom for some scares, and they have some other points in the film where I think they do use the bride to perfection in the scares. But I think because they don't do this enough, I think the film, it lacks a little bit in the scares. The film, it is all in Spanish, so you're reading subtitles the whole time. Some people I know that don't really like that. I don't mind it, and I think with this film, and with Spanish films, I have figured out that they usually do horror pretty well, and I think with this one, I think it does bring out certain scares, but I think the problem with this story is it does waste a lot of time in the background with Sara's family and other characters that don't really need to be in the film as far as carrying the story. It does take away from the runtime. It definitely bogs down the runtime, and it feels that the film is a little bit longer than it should be at points. I just don't think it works, and I feel like when we get to the ending of this film, it definitely stalls out. It's almost like a film where it wants to crank up and get to a certain high gear, and it just doesn't get into that high gear enough. And then when it gets to the point where a reveal should be happening, or certain things are trying to tie up and loose ends are trying to tidy up, I just don't think that it does it. And I think because of that, it definitely lacks an impact in the ending, and it leaves the ending very anticlimactic, and it feels like you just kind of wasted your time by the time the film actually wraps up. I feel like it has quite a bit of different ideas and different ways that it wants to do its scares. I think there are points where people are getting killed off, and I was like, I'm really on board with this. But I just felt like by the time the later half of the film, I would say like the last third of the film, I feel like it's just not that strong, and I feel like it definitely needed tidied up in the writing. I felt like it just was too confusing by the time we actually wrap up in that third act, unfortunately. It definitely had some parts where it reminded me of The Ring, and I think that they used bits and pieces to actually forecast that into the film, and I feel like they don't use that to the advantage, because the story really centralizes on this little girl that went missing years ago, and this mother has been looking for this little girl, and when she actually goes missing, it does involve this well, and I'll leave it at that. We get a story here that definitely lacks tension at certain points in the film, but then it does things right, like certain scares in the film, but it just doesn't have a strong enough story to really tie everything together, unfortunately. So I would say overall, this film, it has some decent atmosphere at points in the film. I think characters, they're done to the best at what they can actually do to the most part. Although I will say, like, the actual character that actually goes missing, I definitely feel like they should have did a better job. So as far as a score for this film, I would give it a 2.5 out of 5. It's all right. I've seen worse horror films this year. I've seen better horror films this year. And this one is just right in the middle. I think it's worth a watch for a horror fan, but I don't think it's anything that you're probably going to watch a second time. But let me know in the comments, what did you think about this film? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you just think it was kind of meh? And if you haven't checked it out, are you going to watch it on Shudder? Thank you guys for watching this review, and I will see you guys on my next review.